All right, so let's do the elephant in the room for just a moment, because I saw you this week on Piers Morgan. He asked you repeatedly about Candace. You repeatedly basically said,
I won't talk about
don't
that.
want to talk
I'll say
about
that
it
here too.
Yeah, and that's fine. And can you at least talk to just sort of where it's at now?
She's free to do whatever she wants to do, to be wherever she wants to be. And the difference between a publisher like the Daily Wire and a platform like Locals is obviously that a platform should have a very broad range of speech that it allows, including speech that maybe even the creators don't believe is inside what they would consider to be the Overton window. It's a very different thing than direct subsidization of particular opinions. The Daily Wire would not have a host, would not pay a host who was staunchly pro-abortion. They would have no obligation to pay a host who is staunchly pro-abortion. And so when it comes to the hosts on the Daily Wire, obviously everyone is able to say what they want. Nobody ever comes to me and says, you can't say X. Nobody ever says that to Walsh. And no one ever said that to Candace. But the reality is that there is an Overton window at the Daily Wire. Obviously, there was a non-meeting of the minds. That's pretty much all I can say on this. And, you know, a lot of this has happened publicly. But you know, to the extent that the Daily Wire is in fact not a publisher, it is that is in fact not a platform, it is a publisher. That means that there is no moral obligation for the Daily, and there's no free speech problem with the Daily Wire saying we don't wish to pay a particular host, or that host saying I don't wish to work here anymore, because again, there's a parting of the ways that you know is not really open for discussion at this point.
Welcome to What's Left, the weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Abarca with co-host, teacher and socialist Andy Lipson. And it's just the two of us today. We're online at whatsleftpodcast.com. You can find that link to our site in the episode notes. You can also find my personal social media handle as at Don Eduardo Abarca on Instagram. Please subscribe, rate, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode where we found this episode. Thank you. All right. I'm still reporting from Bogota, Colombia. And as I said, or as we're speaking, we discussed this week, we are going to do it this time alone, both of us, you and I, as old times.
Yes. And you're not the only person who's changed locations. Well, you've been in Colombia. At this point, Colombia is more your home than the United States. You've been there long enough now. But I am also in a new location. If people can, anybody who's watching, you can see there's a spinning thing behind me. It's like an angelic halo of rotation around my head. But it's a ceiling fan. I'm in New Orleans. If people who might have heard the Raised by Wolves episode that we did, my good friend, best friend, Brian Belknap, who's a musician, has moved here, and during spring break he and I traveled from the Bay Area to New Orleans, 7 hours to Joshua Tree, 10 hours to Albuquerque, 10 hours to Dallas, and then 7 or 8 hours to New Orleans. So it was a 3 or 4 day trip, and now he's going to be permanently located, and he owns a home, but he built a second home behind his home, and I'm in that right now. And if you can see, I'm up in the attic. Oh, look at that. See? And you can see, like, I'm up here. Down there is where I would exit. And then there's a right behind me, like, there's a ladder. And let's see if I can, see that little ladder right there? That's a ladder how I get down from my bed. So I'm living in a bunk bed. It means you've got to wake up and be pretty alert so that you don't stumble down and fall, because that would be bad. But it's great here, and I'm very excited for him. But me and Eduardo, we're dedicated. We don't take vacations. This is how we so we're gonna have what's left today.
Yeah. All right. So here we go. So let's do this short and sweet, so we can have a nice little episode, as I've always wanted to have a little 20-30 minute episode.
We'll see.
The average attention span for folks on YouTube, it's 17 minutes.
17 minutes? Wait, what
That's
is
the
it?
average attention.
17 minutes? We have never done
17 minutes.
The only 17-minute episode we did was to say we're not having an episode.
All right, let's do this. So I'll do a topic intro that we're going to be discussing today. It will be on Candace Owens. I thought it would be interesting to discuss Candace Owens because she's considered to be mostly on the political right and the conservative right of uh, punditry, commentary critics in the USA, and she showed up on my feed from Glenn Greenwald, who was discussing her departure from the Daily Wire, which is a conservative, what they say, a news outlet, and they decided to oust her because of her anti-Semitic remarks, because she's not a very pro-Israel staunch supporter, and she's discussed on several times how she's disgusted by what she's seeing on children in Gaza, Rafah, and people, the Palestinian people, just civilians experiencing deaths at high rates, more than Israelis. And she's defending the children, and so she's an American first kind of person, and she's a supporter of Trump, and she's really anti the trans movement, and she's got a lot of heat for being Black. That's the biggest thing. That's the reason why people think she's got a stronger voice, is because she's a person who doesn't vote Democrat because she's Black. That's what she's been saying for the longest time, since 2016, that she feels as if she's always been pushed and pressured by the left to vote Democrat because she's Black. And she's also known to reveal things of Black Lives Matter, such as financial issues. And she's really anti-Black Lives Matter. We never did an episode, I think, did we, on Kanye West? I forget now. But I know you wanted to do something on Kanye West. And
oh yeah,
and don't you remember that?
Yeah, it
and
was
so
when
she was a. Go ahead.
No, it was around accusations of anti-Semitism.
Right, and she's friends. Well, she was. I'm not sure what her relationship status is with Kanye West. So they, so that's, and she's. I don't know what her relationship status with Kanye West is, but that was for a thing that was, she was a supporter of Kanye West. Anyhow, the point is that what I thought was interesting, what I think the angle should be looked at here, is we've discussed censorship, we've discussed free speech, we've discussed the importance of speaking and saying what you have to say, right? And she was ousted by her employer, the Daily Wire, which was co-founded by Ben Shapiro. And Ben Shapiro is known for speaking out and making lots of money on that principle of free speech. And the Daily Wire is supposed to be anti-mandates and anti-censorship. They were really part of the freedom movement because they were discussing the importance of saying what you thought during that time, during the lockdowns. And here they are censoring one of their own, calling them even anti-Semite. And we've discussed cancel culture, and we've also discussed how people on the left have been labeled racist, have been labeled, and what we've criticized people on the left for labeling anyone racist, anyone being labeled transphobic, anyone labeled these labels just to censor voices, because essentially you can't speak about anything unless you're Black, unless you are underprivileged, you can't speak about anything. And that is what the left has done. And here we are seeing something similar happen with Candace Owens being labeled an anti-Semite. The same thing the left does, we're seeing on the right. And so I'm just trying to highlight. Well, first, I'm just going to get that's the overall broad summary of what I've been watching the debate and back and forth happen online with Ben Shapiro, Candace Owens, and other people who have been ousted, like Piers Morgan and Glenn Greenwald from The Intercept, Piers Morgan from his show, people who have been, and Megyn Kelly and everyone else who've been ousted from their news outlets onto their independent YouTube channels, commenting on, So I'm just finding the hypocrisy of it.
Yeah. And make sure you can hear me pretty well, Eduardo.
I can hear you well.
Okay. And your video might be a little choppy during this episode, just to let you know. But I think the audio is fine. It's just the videos maybe a little choppy. I don't know if that's my connection or your connection, but it is what it is.
Right.
First off, yeah, I completely agree that all the things that the so-called right, and okay, right now when I'm going to use these terms right, I'm going to mean Republicans, people who would vote for Trump, or even people who might say that they're for Rand Paul or for Ron Paul. Even that would not be Republicans; those might be. So I'm speaking broadly of that people I associate over there, and then of the left, of course, it's people who vote Democrat. But I'm going to include the revolutionary left as well, socialists and things like that. Not just the Jacobin socialists, but even the ones who would say they wouldn't vote for the Democrats, or they would say they wouldn't vote for the Republicans. That's what I'm going to mean by the left. I think cancel culture, deplatforming are utilized by both sides. I think they will use them very opportunistically. I mean, really, it's like you said, this is just censorship within the movement. It's not state censorship, actually, in this case, although we obviously are living in a world in which state censorship is growing worse and worse and worse. And essentially, those of us who are in a movement, whether you are in a movement that you would consider a left movement or a movement that was a right movement, in terms of right-leaning, I think both sides have adopted and acclimated, and in fact, in some ways, are using the censorship methods and models that the state both has been using for quite some time, that are being escalated by the state in the forms that we saw in the way that the government is forcing YouTube and Facebook to censor social media, but also in the idea that private companies are allowed to say, no, you can't bring that sort of speech here. The right for a long time has supported that. The left sometimes has been critical of that. Maybe the revolutionary left is critical. Democrats, by and large, acclimate it and kind of go, well, what are you going to do? It's their business. They get the right to do what they want to do. So censorship has been in this country, so-called democracy, which it isn't a democracy. It's a dictatorship. And I was talking to one of my brother's Christian right, a kind of right-wing Christian, and I asked him, do you believe we live in a tyranny or a democracy? And he says, no, we don't live in a democracy. It might be a republic. And so I said, do you think we live in a republic or a tyranny? And he said, we probably live in a tyranny. And I said, yes, that's the situation. So it is, if anybody's thinking about changing the world, and if you are on the right thinking of changing the world, and if you are on the left thinking about changing the world, and you use the exact same tools that the people who fucked up this world use, you are going to fail in changing the world. You cannot succeed in changing the world utilizing the actual tools that our masters and our rulers and our dictators above us use. And so I think this Candace Owens episode has exposed that there is no monopoly, that neither side is principled. In fact, what I would say that I think the right and left are very similar, but what the most unites them is they have no principles. They have no principles that they will really hold to. And in fact, one of the ways you can know that they have no principles is that they vote. Because what voting on the left-wing side means you have to abandon some virtue that you might hold to and some belief you haven't hold to, hold your nose a bit and vote for somebody who doesn't quite represent what you want. And the Republicans do it just as much. They'll do it with Trump. They'll do it with whoever, Ron Paul. And neither of these folks represents truly what people know will amount to their freedom, but they'll vote for them anyway. And so I think that not that it wasn't quite surprising. I find it just very ironic that these people who would just cry and scream about cancel culture or deplatforming and those sorts of things immediately go to it without a second note. I mean, it's just interesting to me. But I actually think what it shows is how actually the right and left are really very similar. They have some lines you might be able to distinguish, but the left is not for choice, and nor is the right. Right? The left will say they're for women to choose that they can have an abortion, but damn, you better not choose about that vax. The right will say, well, you get to choose. You choose what goes in your body, but if a woman chooses to do something with her body, I'll forget it. We're not going to let you do that. So again, I feel like what this episode indicates, or what this has happened with Candace Owen indicates, and I have to give her credit for standing up for her views. And I think one of the things that got her nailed was that she liked a tweet of somebody, and the tweet had some things underneath it that were, probably racist or something like that. And so they were like guilt by association. But even that is so lame. It's like, ask the person what they believe, and if you're against what the person believes, you can argue with them or whatever. But of course, it's all that nonsense. It's all, and by nonsense, I don't mean it's silly. I mean, it's sad that the very things that we're fighting against are being utilized by people who think and Ben Shapiro, I do not believe is in a movement to change anything, but many, like your friend Jake, Eduardo, who really likes Ben Shapiro, many of the people who listen to these people think that's part of change. That those people might be giving voice to something that might change the world, and it's not. They are the opposite of that, and they are just as trapped in, well, they're both as trapped in the left wing, right wing narrative that represents no distinction, or they themselves are authors of promoting the illusion that somehow change will come through them. And so there's nothing there. And I would say, as deeply as I think there's nothing there in the electoral system, I would say when you think that folks like Glenn Greenwald or Ben Shapiro might deliver you to some place that's going to lead you to a place of clarity, you are in a deep delusion about that, because neither of those people are interested in changing the world, in my opinion.
Right. I was just, as I've been seeing this unfold, I saw Ben Shapiro criticize MSNBC for how they try to deplatform or take off or oust Ronna McDaniel, who was I think she was the head of the RNC, Republican National Party. MSNBC had an issue with the former RNC chair Ronna Romney McDaniel because they call her an election denier, or she was she was partly associated with the Republican campaign, the Donald Trump campaign. And Ben Shapiro came on and said, this is complete censorship. This is against free speech, and I understand that, I mean, even it's a, how could MSNBC hire people like Jen Psaki, who went as the official spokesperson for the Biden White House, whose job was to lie, if necessary, to defend Joe Biden, to have a show on MSNBC, or even have the former head of the CIA, John Brennan, and a former senior FBI official and former associate director, Frank Puglisi, I think it is, who are on the air all the time, and they're trained liars of the U.S. security state. And, Todd or anybody wouldn't have ever questioned them, but they question Ronald McDaniel. And these people, even though on the left or the Democrats, as you clearly pointed out, what we're distinguishing what left and right is in this context, people who have spoken and who love Russiagate, who have nothing, like they see nothing wrong with putting Trump in prison, or they love these agencies. They are okay being on MSNBC, but they couldn't have Ron McDaniel on MSNBC. So Ben Shapiro comes out and criticizes this, and hypocritically then does the very same thing he criticizes the very same thing he criticizes for MSNBC doing. He does the very same thing at Daily Wire. I mention these details because I know people listen to these folks. They listen to Ben Shapiro. I know they listen to Matt Walsh. I know they listen to people on the freedom movement or the free speech movement online, on YouTube, on our on podcasts. They suddenly have turned, and I think it's important, as you state, that how we just have to be so careful not to fall into the traps of who we decide to follow. We shouldn't follow anyone. We should follow our own principle. And I speak to my very close friend, Jake. I'm not sure what he would think on this. I don't want to be too unfair, but I know he listens to Ben Shapiro. I know he has followed the Daily Wire. I know he sent me videos on Candace Owens before. And look what's happening there. I think you just have to be weary of anyone and not vote Trump, not vote Biden. These aren't the people who are going to save us. And so when people ask me, why do you criticize? I was being interviewed last night by some university students in Mexico City, and they were asking me about my podcast. They said, what do you do as a co-host at What's Left? And I said, well, I criticize the left. I criticize Joe Biden. I criticize the Democrats. I criticize folks that consider themselves to be liberals and progressives and on the left. And they asked me, why do you do that? Like, why not criticize Trump? And I said, well, because what do I need to criticize Trump for that you already don't know? Like, you already know about Trump. Like, I don't have to speak about the border. I have to speak about Trump's nasty comments, as I'll say his word, nasty. I don't have to say anything. I'm not really that interested in Trump. What I'm interested in is I'm interested in helping my folks, as I consider myself to be still on the left, if there's anything on the left still. I'm interested in making people wake up on my side so they don't fall into the trap of being herded to vote for someone like Biden. I'm interested in having people understand that. And now as we're speaking, I'm interested in having people on the conservative side, or people who think that there might be more in the freedom state of Florida, where they're banning books. I'm interested in having people understand that you can't trust any party. You can't trust both this side, the left, or that right side, because they're just trying to gather or trying to blind you into thinking that they're the one who's going to save you. And that's what I'm trying to do here, So it just comes very what was the word I was going to use? Unprincipled. It's very I can't think of the word right now. It's also very early. We normally do What's Left in the evening around 9 p.m. for me, 10 p.m. actually, and I can't think of it this morning, but uh, but well, I can't think of it this morning. But anyhow, it's just insincere. I think it is, but and people who have made lots of money off of off of fighting against censorship, fighting against labeling people just to shut them up, such as saying they're racist or anything. Or people who have made lots of money off of uh, during the lockdowns, trying to come out as they're the ones trying to fight for our freedom of speech and anti-cancel culture. We're just seeing the true face of it here, as they're the ones who are now or turning against their own. So just be weary, and that's really the message I wanted to point out. I think what I'm trying to communicate is everyone has to find their compass and try to get in that direction. Stick with your principles, and even with your development on your political stance, and not follow anyone. As I had said, like I had broken up with Glenn Greenwald, my boyfriend, who doesn't know he's my boyfriend, and you have to find some way to think for yourself, not to rely on one source or one person, not to be a disciple of anyone. And that's just my message for anyone on as we're seeing things unfold in the political sphere.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that word unprincipled is really important, not just insincere or hypocrite. I think it's important to understand. Now we know that the mainstream media is their only principle is to spread the lies of the state. That is their principle, you know. But then there is something called independent media that was supposedly built to expose those lies of the mainstream, and I think that's where things have gotten difficult for people to figure out what to do. I think the vast majority of those in the independent media, we have to understand that by and large, particularly when they do something like this, their lack of principles are exposed. And once people, it's one thing to make a mistake. It's one thing to even act outside your principles. But if I did that and Eduardo, you told me like, Andy, what are you doing? If I just start making up new lies and new justifications for trying to say why for you showing me that, like, hey Andy, you say you stand for this, but you're doing that, and then you see me do a bunch of like gymnastics in my words. Other than there's only two things to say: either I say no, I've changed my mind, I don't believe that anymore, or I give you information you never had heard and say like this is how it's related to that. But if you start to see me putting a waterfall of words in front of you, and you can't really even follow my logic, and you're like, I guess so, that's a moment to be very concerned. Not obviously, Eduardo, concerned about you, but very concerned about me, and very concerned about whether you should ever listen to me. Like, because you're starting to hear a person talk like an unprincipled person at that point. And so that's really important for people to know, because that means once you hear people doing that, it means that, yes, listen to them. I'm going to continue to listen to Glenn Greenwald. Sometimes I listen to Dave Rubin, who's also falls in that. Like, I just want to see what the right is saying. Ben Shapiro is difficult for me to listen to, but I have no problem people listening to him, because I do think you got to get information from folks. And I talked about Jimmy Dore or Kim Iverson and Scott Ritter and Alex Mercuris or Brian Berletic. These are all people I listen to. I would probably say there's a spectrum of trust that I might have within them. Probably a person like Brian Berletic, that's a person who I probably have more trust for than, say, a person like Glenn Greenwald, who I do use as a source of information, but I don't really trust his angle as much. I think he might be leaving something out, and I think the biggest reason for that isn't so much his position around immigration. It's just that I feel like he's never re-looked at the COVID stuff, and I feel like he's being conscious of doing that. I think he's smart enough to know that he was lied to, and I think he's not saying anything about it, and that tells me I can't really trust him. But I think follow. I mean, we use the word follow. I guess I do follow many people in terms of I'm keeping track of what they're saying and what they say about different issues, and I'll listen to those folks as well. But if I was to think about who do I trust, Eduardo, I trust you. I trust Kenny. I trust Hema. I trust John Kleisik. I trust Alison McDowell. I don't always necessarily agree with her, but I feel like she's coming from a place of sincerely wanting to change the world and trying to figure out really what's really going on. I have trust for her in terms of what she says, and that's again a different thing than agreement. And beyond that, obviously I trust Brandy. I trust my brother. Like beyond that, I don't know these people. And sometimes in the freedom space, people use the term like psyop or limited hangout, things like that. I don't necessarily know about those sorts of terms they exist. Those things definitely exist. The CIA does create limited hangouts. There is such a thing as a psyop, but it's impossible for me to determine if a person like Ben Shapiro or Glenn Greenwald or Kim Iverson or Jimmy Dore is actually a state actor or Alex Jones that has been created as a cutout to kind of like make something happen and move our minds in some way. But I can say I listen to all those folks at some level and don't fully trust them in terms of what they tell me. I'll take it and decide for myself later, what do I really think? But I still feel like the biggest thing that comes out of this episode is for me to say that it reminds me that I think our reason for challenging the left is to show it how it is to expose the elements of the left that were ultimately no different than the right that they said they opposed. And that's when we first started, when we talked about what's left. I do think that was partly why we were criticizing the left, because we expected the left to be different than the right, and it wasn't. And so we were critical of that. Now I would say I no longer expect the left to be different than the right. In my opinion, the mainstream left and the mainstream right are the same. The distinction I will make is reformist versus revolutionary, and virtually none of those people, except for, like I mentioned, Alison McDowell, I think is a revolutionary, even if I'm not sure she and I agree on how to get there. I think John Kleisik is a revolutionary and wants some kind of change, even if I don't think he's certainly not a socialist. But Jimmy Dore, Kim Iverson, Glenn Greenwald, Ben Shapiro, Alex Jones, the people talk about Joe Rogan, I guess, or whatever. Those people they're not. They might be truthful at times, but they're not committed to making the kind of change this world's going to need to make. And I do think those are the people that I am the people who I'm most interested in listening to are the people who I believe have made that commitment, because it's a commitment I've made, and I'd like to see if I can figure out how do we do this. And I think those people will be more helpful in that. And I do think having principles and behaving as a principled person in relationship to your ideas and being honest and truthful is a core part of being able to help lead us or get us to that point of being able to have revolutionary change. So those are some things that come to mind for me.
Right. And as I conclude, because I really am thinking that this is a wake-up call, and it also helped me. I really did. I'm not a fan of Candace Owens, really. I every time someone sent me something from her, I just sort of, I'll listen to it, I guess, sometime. I'm not always sure she's very sincere. But what I appreciated about this was she stood her ground, and she was turned against her own people. And And it really goes to show you could be turned against anyone can turn against you in this battle of ideas, and especially of the people trying to pigeonhole or trying to hold you to certain beliefs because you are on the left or on the right. And as you brilliantly said, that these things are not, that's not how we see the world, and that's not how we on What's Left are. We've evolved as well on this channel / podcast. But I really am, I guess what came out of me, and as we concluded trying to share with you, and I wanted to do this episode, was I'm finding this peace within me that it's all right and not to be scared to come out with what I stand for, which has been difficult because of the severing ties with friends, community, and which is the reason why I've stayed off of Facebook, because most of those people who I am friends, so-called friends with, because that's the word that they use the button for on Facebook, are liberals, are progressives, are people on the Democrat side, or people who I've done campaigns with. And I've now come out as someone who is a right-winger. I don't consider myself even a right-winger. And who think maybe they'll probably think I'm, I don't know, giving platform to certain voices. And I don't think I am. I really think I am. I can't be I can't be a person of color and share certain opinions, or because I'm not supposed to be. I'm supposed to be a puppet for the Democrats. That's what I'm supposed to be. So, I've had difficulties sharing What's Left episodes. I remember in the very beginning, back in 2018, 2017. When did we start? 2018, I think it was.
2018, yeah.
Yeah, on Facebook. And I remember you asking me, and I would share them with specific people in groups, or in messaging groups on different platforms, but I wouldn't share it on my feed. And I just had difficulties because I thought people would see me as a crazy person. And I was trying to figure things out on my own. And so this is what it's come down to, as we're talking about this episode, it's given me strength and also a voice. Just as I said, to be comfortable with myself. That's what I found out through this of these back and forth, the debates between Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro and the whole thing. It really was like, where do I stand? And would I be all right? Even if people turned on me, I know you wouldn't, Andy. I've seen you not turn on me. I know that I would have probably, maybe at some point, in the years, in the very beginning of What's Left, I was trying to change that, but I was trying to figure myself out, and so I'm all right with people letting go. I mean, people have let go of me since 2020, 2021, when I came out against mandates. I came out against the narrative that was being spread on COVID. So I guess the people who are truly your friends stick around, and the people who really find you, who are sincere and real, not hypocritical, not two-faced, and they're not showing one side and being another. And I hope that I continue being friends of people who are different, have different stances of me. I may disagree, very staunchly disagree with someone, but I hope that person also accepts me, because I will accept them. I don't know if I'll be, when the time comes, of course, and we're not there yet, but if the time comes and we have to fight the real fight, and we have a division of stands, and we'll have assemblies and discussions and fierce political debates where I think they'll really matter, not like these where we have to have it online and waiting. We're trying to build something here, but I think that's when we'll probably split on some matters. Not totally, I don't think, because I'm not necessarily someone who believes like this is my label, this is where my stand is. It's nuanced, but we're not there yet. We're not there yet. We're not forming uh, collectives and societies at this time where I think I have to split. And if I did, I'd still have some connection. I would have to be too concentrated on what I'm building that I'd be occupied doing that work, you know. But I don't know if I'd be severing, my English, severing ties, necessarily. But that's a whole other conversation. What I just want to just point out is I'm more comfortable with who I am and what I stand for today than I was back, 5 years ago. So that's what I gathered from all of this personally.
Okay. Yeah, I think I agree with you when this event does give me a second look at Candace Owens. I always thought she was very intelligent and expressed herself well and was informed about some of her stuff, even if I disagreed. I remember she had a debate with Russell Brand, where I agreed mostly with Russell Brand, but I did think she made good points there. But I would say the most impressive thing is, as far as I can tell, again, these are people I don't really know, is her willingness to stand up for what she believes in and then be willing to be jettisoned by the institution. Um, and I think this gets us to the thing you were raising, which is about severing ties and people being abandoned or abandoning people. When I see institutions are fine with abandoning people because they think the institution is more important than the person. And that's what has happened to Candace Owens here. That's what happened to me at my job. Eduardo, that's what happened to you in relationship to the union and in relationship to people who were also people of color who basically said, you can't say what you are saying. They were essentially saying, our institution is more important than you, Eduardo, so you have to go. And that's why it's really important to really check yourself. Now, check ourselves when we let people go. Are we acting, is it something between us, or am I acting in the name of an institution that I want to be connected to and I got to leave somebody behind in order to stay with that institution? If you're doing that, you really might want to check yourself. You immediately want to check what you're doing, because none of these institutions that exist in this world at this point, in a world which has no social movement, which doesn't have a revolutionary movement in it, none of these institutions are worth preserving. So there's certainly no relationship that's worth losing to maintain a hold to any institution that is part of preserving the way this world is structured. And so I think that's a principle I'm going to have right now. And I hope, Eduardo, you and I keep ourselves honest. People know my uncle died a week and a half ago, and he and I lost touch as a result of COVID. And that was unfortunate. I think a similar thing has happened with my sister, who's not dead, but she and I have lost touch as a result of some of the stuff, the way that what I did around COVID and maybe how she thought it should have been done. And there's certain things that sit sorely in my heart in relationship to that. And I struggle sometimes about how can I mend those relationships with my uncle. I was just glad that I told him I loved him before he passed. And with my sister, I'm still trying to figure it out. But in many ways, I guess I am sort of thinking about Allison right now. And she's somebody who I do value, who I do believe is honest, but I think she doesn't really necessarily want to do work with us. And I think she told us the terms upon which that work would be done. And I don't think I'm totally comfortable with those terms. But I will say that I wish that distance could be overcome. because I think that it is necessary. And maybe this is a difference I have with Allison. I believe we really have to build as many connections as we can, even with people we disagree with, to see if we can grow together to build a better world. And we won't be able to do that unless we're in connection with each other. And that's why I think it's so important to really measure many, many times before you cut. Like the term is measure twice, cut once. But I think a person really has to think deeply about, is this necessary, before they cut ties with another person. In light of the world I think we're going to need to build, which is going to require us to work together so much. And it's going to require, I believe, for me to make definite concessions in relationship to what people around me are saying we need to do compared to what I might want. Because I'm going to have to say, look, I need these folks. So it's not all going to go my way. I'll go along with this because I want to build that better world. Now, obviously, even in that, you can hear, oh, wait, what are your principles? And then I think that's where it becomes tricky. It's like, I do believe ultimately there do need to be principles that we adhere to, that even if the crowd goes one way, we are going to go another way. So that's the struggle to me, or part of the struggle of finding that better world that I think we can build, which is, what's the relationship? When is the compromise correct or appropriate, and when is it not? And I suspect we're going to have to learn by doing.
And as far as Alison McDowell, I mean, she could say whatever she wants about me or whatever. I still follow her. She's good information. She's very smart. She's on it. And I'm not really offended by what, she says about us, or you might be, or someone else might be on WhatsApp.
But I want to be clear. Hold on. She hasn't said anything bad about us. She's just not.
No, really, she hasn't. She hasn't.
No. She.
No, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So I think.
No, she has not.
Yeah, I think she's just made a decision to not really come to on our show, and she disagrees with some of the stuff we're doing. I think she disagrees with, even some of this community stuff. I think she disagrees with that, like in terms of, we might preserve relationships with people beyond what she would say we should. And I also think she was pretty explicit. Like, I think she's had a recent falling out with Jason, and I think what she fell out with Jason is the same she fell out with us. Is she invited us to join her group that was about Web3, and I think we said, oh, we might do that in terms of, like, we'd be willing to be part of that, but we couldn't commit to doing the kind of research that she and some of her colleagues were going to do. And I think she didn't like that. I think she said, no, this area that we're talking about is really critical, and we need co-thinkers and co-researchers. I need she wants true collaborators, and not just people who are kind of consume her research, which is what we were doing. And so she said, no, I have to stand by what I'm doing there. And on that basis, I feel like the decision she made with Jason was very similar to the decision she made with us. And in that regard, she's consistent. So I don't agree with the framing or the ultimate. I wouldn't do it that way that she's doing, but I understand it. But I actually have a lot of trust that she is a person who is trying to really make this world a different place. And so that's why I would put her in terms of listening to her, I put her in a different category. I put her more like with John Kleisick than I would with, say, Kim Iverson or certainly Glenn Greenwald. I feel like she's truly independent. She just has her own way of doing things, which is what an independent person would do. I just would say it's, I don't agree with the way she's decided to work with us, and possibly even the way she's decided to work with Jason. But people can have disagreements. But she's never kind of like, I feel like she's never insulted us or said anything that I thought was wrong in relationship to us or me. And so, I mean, she could, and that'd be fine, but that hasn't happened.
No, it hasn't happened. anyhow, let's wrap up. This has been a good conversation. I think it was on a personal level more than anything. The reason why I wanted to bring it up was because of my own inner peace with, as I said, with being comfortable with who I am and what I stand for. And that's what came out of this. I don't know how, it just did for me.
Yeah, no, but it makes sense to me. We're watching a person get kicked to the curb unfairly. I think there's a lot that comes up for us when that happens.
Yeah, it does. There's a lot that comes up for sure. All right, I have a flight. Let's do this, Andy. And we did almost an hour, which is what wasn't the idea to do it almost an hour. Goodness.
Well, turns out there's a lot of ideas in this thing. So,
all right. Well, that does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast that's challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes where we found this episode, or on our blog at what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find that episode. You can find past episodes to this podcast /channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything you've heard, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on Spotify, iTunes Podcasts, Bitchute, Odysee, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. You can find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes where we found this episode. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host Andy Lipson. Thank you very much for joining me and for doing this at this hour, Andy. And it's always good to do it like old school, old times.
Agreed.
Thank you all for listening. Thank you. Ciao. Did you do any reading, anything?
Nope. I mean, I know something about this, but I but I pretty much just am like, I'm not going to give any details about this situation. So,
this would be a good one.
But I know about it. I know about it. I've heard about it, and I've followed some elements of it. I know about it. I think I say the most important things about things I know nothing about.
Well,
that's when I sound the smartest. My most brilliant things are about things I have no idea about. So I'm going to be brilliant today.